Yes.
In this last session, sir, I'm going to hopefully finish the stopgap redevelopments and also look briefly at the Prorata mechanism of distribution of blood products and the single plasma packs, and then consider very briefly the full redevelopment of BPL, which followed in the 80s. Before we turn to that, though, a word or two about plasma supply in the late 1970s. We saw yesterday how the £500,000 investment from central funds in the mid-1970s led to an increase in plasma dedicated to factor concentrates to meet the targets of around 340,000 donations per annum by mid-1977. However, as is set out in Appendix 2, in particular paragraph 34 of Appendix 2, supply began to slow and to tail off after 1977. The figure for 1977, expressed in kilograms rather than in terms of donations, was 64,000 kilograms of fresh frozen plasma provided to BPL and PFL. In 1978, the figure was 78,000 kilograms, so an increase of 14,000. And 1979, it was 77,000 kilograms, so a slight decrease of 1,000 kilograms between 78 and 79. Those figures come from Appendix 4 of Dr. Lane's draft proof of evidence, and we will discuss tomorrow some of the caveats that apply to that source. If we could turn, please, to DHSC 302195_065. This is a document which was prepared by Dr. Walford following her attendance at a Hemophilia Centre Directors meeting on the 20th to the 21st of November 1979. The front page says 1978, but that is an error. We know that this comes from 1979. If we turn to the second page, please, Paul. We can see in the bottom right-hand corner that the date given there is, for the note, is the 23rd of November 1979. And from the context, as we will see, it's talking about, amongst other things, factor VIII usage during and at the end of 1978. And hence, we know that this must be from 1979. Just on the first page, I'm going to come to the section dealing with plasma supply in a second, but just as a useful little snapshot of where things stood, the meeting discussed, amongst other things, the reports received from the haemophilia centres for 1978, so for the previous year, and that showed a total of 46.5 million international units, as calculated according to the table, have been used in the UK for 1978. Slightly confusingly, the figure of 47 million units is given directly below that. I'm afraid I can't account for the difference of 450,000 there.
Well, it's rounding up.
I think it must simply be that. NHS concentrate is around 15 million international units. Commercial concentrates are around 19.5 million international units. Cryoprecipitate is around just over 12 million international units and 24,000 international units of plasma. The percentage proportions are 32% NHS concentrate, 41% commercial concentrate, 26% cryoprecipitate, and 5% plasma. That is for 1978. A couple of other points to pick out from the meeting. There are 4,085 known haemophilia A patients in the United Kingdom. So that is a higher figure than some of the ones that we had seen from the early 1970s. so a larger population than had been thought. The average usage of factor VIII per patient at that time was 22,000 international units per annum, which correlates relatively closely to Dr. Bidwell's earlier estimate. That is, of course, for 1978. We can see that at that time, there were 976 patients on home therapy, or about to start home therapy. And a little further down, 98 patients were receiving prophylactic alternate day treatment. So a relatively small number of patients receiving prophylactic treatment. As that number grows, you would expect the average usage per patient to grow as well. So that is just a snapshot of where we were in 1978. I would also note that Hemophilia B, 101 patients were on home treatment in 1978, and 25 of those were on prophylaxis. The second page, please, Paul. This is a note of the talk by Dr. Lane, and it is Dr. Walford's note of that talk. And it is of interest in particular in respect of this question of plasma supply. What Dr. Walford records Dr. Lane as saying is this. BPL achieved its peak factor VIII output early in 1977. Since that time, production has remained static. If anything, in 1979, there has been a fall-off in production because of a fall in the supply of plasma. The peak BPL annual production of factor VIII equals 17 million international units. I'll come back to that figure. However, BPL has now run out of fresh frozen plasma from which the concentrates are produced, and December is a very poor month for blood donations. To ensure future production, Dr. Lane said that there must be guaranteed plasma supplies and totally accountable usage. This would require a common source of funding for BPL and the RTCs. There should also be a complete change in the arrangements for purchase and distribution of factor VIII. BPL could be responsible for both production of factor VIII and central purchase and distribution of commercial concentrate. If BPL's production rose, the purchase of commercial concentrate could be correspondingly reduced and vice versa. Dr. Lane's proposed a system whereby he returned to a region all the factor VIII derived from that region's plasma. He proposed that BPL should charge for concentrate returned to the regions and said that this would be an incentive to the regions to produce more plasma of high quality, since the higher the quality of the plasma, the greater the yield of factor VIII per unit of plasma, hence the lower unit cost of factor VIII to the regions. If a region produced too much plasma for its own requirements for factor VIII, it could sell the excess factor VIII to other regions at an NHS price, well below commercial prices. The cost of commercial factor VIII in the UK was currently the lowest in Europe because of the effects of on the market of the free NHS concentrate. If BPL did not exist, the cost of the commercial product would go up considerably. In addition, evidence from the USA indicated that there had been a recent fall-off in the use of albumin preparations, i.e. a decoupling of the factor VIII albumin usage, and the commercial companies would probably endeavour to recoup their losses on the sale of albumin by increasing the unit cost of factor VIII. Dr. Lane pointed out that in commercial terms, factor VIII production comprised only 20% of the total blood product production by BPL. For a running cost of £1.4 million per annum, BPL was producing the commercial equivalent of £9 to £10 million of blood products. Dr. Lane's talk was greeted with enthusiasm by the directors, who felt they had been kept in the dark by the previous director of BPL. They expressed great concern about the situation and wished to know how they could help to bring pressure to bear for the requisite expenditure on BPL, with the aim of NHS self-sufficiency. A couple of notes from the marginalia on that. We don't know who made the marginalia. The last comment, the directors expressed great concern about the situation and wished to know how they could help to bring pressure to bear for the requisite expenditure on BPL with the aim of NHS self-sufficiency, is marked with 2 lines and an exclamation mark. Presumably that is done by somebody within the Department of Health, because this is a DHSS document. A little higher up, please, as well, Paul. We can see next to the sentence, Dr. Lane proposed a system whereby he returned to a region all the factor VIII derived from that region's plasma. Next to that is written, not all directors seem in favour of this. That, sir, is a nod towards the Prorata distribution, which we'll come on to talk about in a second. The figure there given of 17 million international units, which is described as the peak BPL annual production of factor VIII. I'm afraid that figure is a little bit of a mystery to us. BPL production, according to the inquiry legal team's research, was around 15 million international units at around this time. The NHS concentrate produced, according to the reports, was about 15 million international units, and that would have been not just BPL but also PFL and PFC as well. And so I'm afraid we're not entirely sure what that 17 million international units refer to, whether it's a potential capacity if certain works were done, or if it referred to a certain stage of the Stopgap programme where it got to expand the capacity. It could be that. It could simply be that Dr. Walford has noted that down incorrectly in the report. We don't know.
I have a recollection, whether it's from reading this on an earlier occasion or not, I can't say. But I have a recollection of having seen 17 or 17.5 somewhere else. So it's it may be that you just need to double check that it hasn't been mentioned somewhere else, if it matters.
We'll keep digging. It certainly could be a indication of the fact that the Stopgap programme had made some progress in expanding the capacity from 15 million to 17 million. But the short point is 15 million or 17 million, it is still well below the estimates for future usage at that time. And as we can see from the first page of that document, it is well below the current usage of factor concentrates at that time as well. Dr. Lane, in that talk, is stressing that the problem isn't just the capacity of BPL, it's the fact that there has been a plateauing off of plasma supply to BPL at that time. And that is something which he sought to address in 2 ways. One is, as he hints at in the talk, the Prorata distribution method, and the second is the increased use of single plasma packs, both of which we'll discuss shortly. We have now caught up with Dr. Walford's evidence. I'm not going to repeat that evidence, and I'm not going to go through the next stage in anything like the detail that we have gone through the past stage in. It may help, though, just to provide a quick aide-memoire in the form of the chronological tables which are in the written presentation. And if we could have those on the screen, please, Paul. INQY 40333, page 79. And this is just a very brief overview chronology about the redevelopment of BPL from 1979 until 1982, and 2 strands operating at that time. One is what is happening with the Stopgap and MARP 01 programmes, and the second is what is happening with the decision-making on the redevelopment of the BPL. I'm not going to look at the second now. It is there in the table, and it was discussed at length with Dr. Walford. But I am just going to trace through what happens to Stopgap and the outcome of Stopgap. The first entry in that table is the 13th of June 1979, and that's the Joint Management Committee of BPL deciding that the Stopgap programme should go ahead. But then on the 13th of July 1979, Mr. Harley of the DHSS advised the Joint Management Committee against incurring any more expenditure on the Stopgap scheme until the future of BPL was decided. A submission about the future of BPL went in on the 21st of December 1979, and that went to ministers. On the 7th of January 1980, as we heard from Dr. Walford, Dr. Vaughan, the Minister of State for Health, agreed to the proposals that there should be a short-term upgrade to BPL and that there should be further exploration of options for rebuilding, including considering private sector involvement. But he did not commit to a decision in principle to rebuild BPL. But so far as Stopgap is concerned, there is agreement that a short-term programme should go ahead. On the 20th of February 1980, Dr. Lane was authorised to proceed with Stopgap, but with the DHSS anticipating that the total spend would be somewhere in the region of £750,000. Dr. Lane expressed concern about that figure and said that actually he thought it would cost somewhere between £2 and £2.5 million over 2 to 3 years. On the 23rd of April 1980, ministers asked for Stopgap measures to be, quotes, re-examined to see if there might be scope for further savings. So it's looking like even that £750,000 is now under threat. On the 8th of May 1980, following further minutes and further meetings, Dr. Harris, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, wrote to Mr. Wormold of the DHSS supporting a reappraisal of short-term works required at BPL. And he commented that, and I quote, "If ministers do not like the results of our reappraisal, it is up to them to carry the responsibilities and the subsequent serious consequences." I don't think we have to read between too many lines to see that there is some tension there. On the 22nd of May 1980, Dr. Lane wrote to Mr. Harley enclosing costings of a revised programme of works for BPL. This programme is now named MARP 01, so that's the Medicines Act Rehabilitation Project, and Dr. Lane said that it was renamed to distinguish it from Stopgap, but it is still an interim programme for development at BPL. On the 11th of June 1980, so the following month, Dr. Lane was asked to put forward a new set of proposals based on the assumption that only £500,000 was going to be available to him. He did that despite expressing reservations about that figure. 29th of July 1980, a submission was approved by Dr. Vaughan, the minister, agreeing to capital expenditure of £1.3 million over 2 years and rejecting options involving lesser expenditure. So the programme can go ahead and the capital spend will be £1.3 million over 2 years rather than the lesser sums which have been floated in the months previously. That is in July 1980, but it is not until the 2nd of February 1981 that Dr. Lane is given formal authority by the North West Thames Regional Health Authority to proceed to tender with the MARP 01 or 01 programme.
Can you help how precisely that worked? You told me earlier that the purpose of North West Thames RHA having an involvement in BPL was to be the employer of the staff, because an employer was necessary. This isn't an employer's task, this is somebody who owns the site. or who has oversight or control of the building, which I thought was DHSS's job.
Well, the owning of the site, I cannot tell you the exact conveyancing details. My understanding is that the North West Thames Regional Health Authority were the client for the project.
Well, I follow that, but why were they, if their role in this, in BPL, was simply to employ the staff?
I think I may have oversimplified it. I think it is beyond just employing the staff. I think it's to be the legal authority for the running of the site, which may include a role as the manager of the building.
So DHSS ran it without having the legal authority to do so?
So I cannot assist, I'm afraid.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm asking you questions you don't know the answer to, but it would be helpful just at some point to have that clarified.
Yes.
I doubt it matters in the overall scheme of things very much, but it would just be nice to bottom that one out.
In Dr. Lane's statement, paragraphs 281 and 284, there may be a degree of explanation. What he said at paragraph 281, Paul, perhaps we can have this on screen, CBLA 605_002. So 605_002. This is the fifth draft proof of evidence of Dr. Lane, a document that we'll see more of in the coming days. If we could turn, please, Paul, to page 115. And then paragraph 281. Dr. Lane wrote... So actually, perhaps we can go to the previous paragraph, 280, which might provide the context. So at the meeting of the Scientific and Technical Committee, which took place on the 17th of September 1980, there was once again reference in paragraph 7 of the minute to the Minister's approval of capital expenditure of £1.3 million, that's, as I've just mentioned, for the next 2 financial years, and concurrent increase in revenue expenditure. It was stated, however, if we go on to the next page, please, North West Thames Regional Health Authority had agreed to take on project management of the upgrading work, although the precise arrangements had yet to be formalised.
Yes.
Back to Dr. Lane. In the event, for reasons which may be understandable, but which gave rise to a further frustrating period of delay, North West Thames refused to take over the management of the project until their capital works personnel had rechecked the building estimate. Their view, not unreasonably, was that since they had not been consulted about these figures and had made no contribution to their formulation, they had a vested interest in checking them before becoming the responsible client body on behalf of the Department of Health.
Well, it now makes rather more sense to me that their role, which they had agreed to do, was project management. They already did project management, presumably because of the various buildings within the region, and therefore had teams capable of doing that on the ground, ready to go.
Yes.
And that makes very good sense. But it's not quite as you put it, I think.
Yes, I think I may have overstated it by saying that their responsibility was restricted purely to being the employing body of the employees. They did do other tasks as well.
Yeah.
The distinction, though, I think, out of fairness to North West Thames Regional Health Authority, is that questions of grand strategy, as it were, of long-term policy, they were not for the Regional Health Authority. Those were for the DHSS to sort out. So that explains that period of delay, which Dr. Lane says was frustrating, although he can understand it from the point of view of the Regional Health Authority. Following that authorisation, the MARP-01 programme continues. Dr. Lane said that it retained only some elements of the original stopgap proposals in view of the severe financial controls being exercised. So it was not quite as expansive as stopgap would have been, although there was considerable overlap between the two programmes. The temporary or interim redevelopment did allow for an expansion of production at BPL, but it did so contrary to the recommendations of the original report of the Medicines Inspectorate, which had, as we have seen, advised that there should be no such expansion of production until the concerns identified in the report have been addressed. That perhaps shows that the leeway that was given to NHS facilities under the Medicines Act and under the waiver of Crown exemption. Dr. Lane summarised the effect of stopgap in the BPL annual report of 1982 to 1983. And if we go to that now, please, Paul. DHSC 302239_003. We can see from the front page that this is a report, although it's entitled an annual report, it actually covers the period from April 1982 to December 1983. And it is dated the 16th of January 1984, and it goes in under the name of Dr. Lane. If we could turn to page 3, please. What Dr. Lane wrote is this. This report covers 21 months from April 1982 to December 1983, and its presentation to the Central Blood Laboratories Authority coincides with the completion of the authority's first year of management. The report incorporates activities of the Blood Products Laboratory, Elstree, and the Plasma Fractionation Laboratory, Oxford. During this period, £2.5 million has been spent on modernisation and extension of the existing buildings to allow increased output of factor VIII and albumin solutions to occur with safety while a new production building is completed. This project, called the Medicines Act Redevelopment Project, MARP, was finished by November 1982, and the post-MARP production targets met in 1983. Annual factor VIII output has doubled to 30 million international units, and units of plasma protein fraction and albumin have increased from 130,000 to 220,000. The shelf value of this extra production is about £3.5 million, which has already greatly offset the capital expenditure involved. To support the extra production, regional blood transfusion centres have doubled the input of fresh frozen plasma, FFP, taken from voluntary donated whole blood. FFP intake is now 150,000 kilograms per annum. We go down 2 paragraphs, please, Paul. The development of a new production building commenced on site at Elstree in April 1983 and will cost in excess of £21 million. And then a little later in that paragraph, normal capacity is 450,000 kilograms fresh frozen plasma throughput annually to provide 100 million international units of factor VIII and 200 kilograms of albumin per 1 million population, deemed necessary to give self-sufficiency to the NHS in these products. So that is talking about the fully redeveloped BPL, which by that time had been agreed and planned, and work was commencing on that. The earlier section that I read was about the Stopgap stroke MARP programme, which had achieved its goal of doubling output to 30 million international units and also doubling the intake of fresh frozen plasma to 150,000 kilograms per annum. In a later report, Dr. Lane would explain that the final cost of MARP was £2.8 million rather than the £2.5 million which had been reached by the time of that report. He said, and I quote, "A significant part of this inflated figure was absorbed by repetitive design and interruptions in implementation." And that is in a document, the reference of which is CBLA 302298. If we could go back to the bar chart that we looked at earlier, Paul, it's INQY 40336, page 42, please. And if we could just focus, please, on the period from 1977 to 1983 and 1984. Thank you. We can see between 76 and 77 that increase that was the result of the £500,000 investment from Dr. Rowan. Then output of, and sorry, this is referring to the blue section, the NHS Factor 8 output. That then plateaus, perhaps slightly declines into 1980. And then there is an increase to 1981, a smaller increase to 1982, and then increases into 1983 and 1984. And those increases of output of NHS factor concentrate are a result of the Stopgap stroke MARP 01 programs. We can see in that time there is also a significant amount of commercial product purchased. As NHS output increases, the proportion of commercial to NHS seems to decline in 83 and 84 from a high point in 1981 and 1982, possibly 1980 as well. The amount of cryoprecipitate being used is declining in this period. Those are the broad trends. If we could take that down, please, Paul. The plasma supply, which was also doubled, is related, it seems, to both the Prorata and the single plasma pack initiatives. Those are discussed at Appendix 4 and Appendix 5. I'm not going to go through all of those, but I will provide a very quick summary. Prorata. The basic principle is that blood products manufactured at BPL and PFL would be distributed to the regions in proportion to the amount of fresh frozen plasma that they provided to BPL. As we have seen from Dr. Lane's talk to the Hemophilia Centre directors, the idea was that this would serve as an incentive for the regions to invest in both the quantity and the quality of the plasma that they were providing to BPL. And the qualitative point is an important one for Dr. Lane. The thinking behind the pro-rata scheme was that as well as that direct incentive, it would also encourage the sort of contractual relationship or semi-contractual relationship between BPL and the regional health authorities that Dr. Waiter and Mr. Dutton had identified as being desirable in their earlier paper. There is evidence to support the idea that this slightly more nebulous idea did play a role in increasing plasma supply, or at least in removing disincentives to plasma supply from the regions to BPL. If we could go, please, Paul, to DHSC 302201_006. This is a letter which is sent by W.J.E. McKee, the Regional Medical Officer for the Wessex Regional Health Authority, to Mr. Shaw of the DHSS. And it is from the 8th of October 1980, when Mr. McKee and other regional medical officers have been asked their thoughts about increasing plasma supply to BPL and about the Prorata scheme, which Dr. Lane was encouraging at that time. What Mr. McKee said is this in the second paragraph. We are very much in favour of any proposal to increase the capacity of BPL up to national self-sufficiency. I would point out, however, that our previous experiences with BPL have not been all that satisfactory. Our plans for the current year included a significant increase in plasma collection. These plans were based on information supplied to us by the Director of Blood Products Laboratory, Elstree, and at considerable cost had to be abandoned when we were informed that BPL were unable to meet their part of the arrangement. We are therefore reluctant to start planning again until we have definitive assurance from BPL that they can accept our plasma and protein fraction. Our own blood transfusion centre has, for a number of years, included in the long-term planning a move to self-sufficiency, which has always been limited by the capacity at BPL. We fully support the proposal to supply products pro rata to plasma volume and quality, provided that the special position of Lord Mayor Treloar Hospital, Alton, which provides a national service to patients with haemophilia, is recognised and additional factor 8 AHF is allocated to this region. So Dr. McKee's letter there, perhaps providing some support for the idea that there had to be some degree of a relationship between BPL and each region in order to encourage the investment in that region, in the plasma supply, in the knowledge that it was actually going to produce a return, either nationally or for them. There was also a point of equity in the pro rata scheme. There was a sense that some regions were in effect subsidising others by investing and providing larger amounts of plasma, while others could obtain the factor VIII without doing so. In the written report, there are some bar charts which demonstrate how that may have operated. I won't take you to those. We can see from the appendix that Dr. Lane, and it seems again very much as if it was his initiative, began to lay the groundwork for the pro rata scheme from September 1977, while he was still the director designate. He won the support of Mr. Dutton, perhaps unsurprisingly in light of the earlier paper which either he or Dr. Waiter wrote. And he subsequently also won the backing of Dr. Tovey, then the consultant advisor. The plan was discussed in 1979 at various meetings, and it seems to have been accepted by regional transfusion directors by February 1980. Later that year, regional administrators were informed that it would be introduced from the 1st of April 1981. When it was introduced, it wasn't a pure pro rata scheme. There were some special units identified who would, in effect, sit outside the scheme, and factor concentrates would be provided to them disproportionately compared to the amount of plasma that they provided. because it was recognised that they were providing a national service. Lord Mayor Treloar School was one of those examples, and we can see Mr McKee making the point that he wanted that to be considered from an early stage. Also, the Army was the other, I think, main example. The scheme at first operated on the basis that it would be about 80% pro rata and 20% would be used to create a national stockpile and to address the needs of those special units. Special provisions were made initially for Wessex and for Oxford regions, which continued to be supplied by PFL, as they had been historically. Again, there is a bar chart in the written presentation which shows the effect of the 80% pro rata distribution, which leads to some regions getting more blood products because they're producing more plasma and some regions getting less. The pro rata scheme led to the end of the arrangements whereby BPL had supplied Northern Ireland with blood products. It was decided that Northern Ireland would be treated pro rata, and as for logistical reasons, Northern Ireland did not provide fresh frozen plasma to BPL. Its pro rata return was therefore nil. And Northern Ireland was encouraged to think about the further arrangements and the future arrangements it would make, and ultimately that led to it coming to an agreement with the PFC in Liberton about the provision of plasma and the provision of blood products. You'll hear more about that next week. The pro rata scheme did not apply to factor 9 products. The reason was that at the time that it was introduced, England and Wales were largely self-sufficient in factor 9, and hence it was supplied on demand. A key to the pro rata distribution scheme is that at that time, for factor 8, demand universally exceeded supply, so all regions had an incentive to increase their plasma production in order to get more factor 8. By 1989, that was no longer the case for factor 8. We'll come to look at that tomorrow. By that time, plasma-rich regions could end up with more factor 8 than they were actually using. And that led to a change of scheme, and in 1989, the cross-charging scheme is introduced instead of pro rata. So that is the pro rata scheme. Single plasma packs. Again, this is an initiative that seems to have come largely from Dr. Lane, and we saw earlier today the original raising of the scheme from about 1977, I think, when he first suggested it. The background is that the collection by glass bottles had given way to a system of 5-litre pooling, whereby plasma from different donations would be pooled at the regional transfusion centres into one 5-litre bag that was then sent to BPL. That was done in an open system, as we saw described in the documents earlier. In other words, plasma was exposed during that pooling system. That open system was contrary to the principles of good manufacturing practice unless it was done in a sterile area. And because it would fall foul of the Medicines Inspectorate once Crown immunity was waived, there was a need to consider what regional transfusion centres were going to do about this. One possibility was to try to create sterile areas in each of the 14 regional transfusion centres, which would have involved considerable capital cost. Dr. Lane's proposal was that instead of doing that, there should be a new single plasma pack, and that should be used to collect the plasma that was being taken from the whole blood donation and to collect it in a closed system so that that plasma was not exposed to the elements at the regional transfusion centre, and it would not be pooled until it arrived at BPL. When it did arrive at BPL, it would be pooled eventually in a sterile area. And Dr. Lane pointed out that it is better to spend the money creating one such sterile area at BPL rather than 14 at all of the regional transfusion centres. That, however, was not the only benefit that Dr. Lane foresaw. If we could go, please, to CBLA 301153. This is a paper that was produced by Dr. Lane on the 16th of September 1980. It's not his first paper on this topic, but it provides a helpful summary of what he considered to be the benefits of single plasma packs. If we could turn, please, to page 3. The final paragraph beginning in summary. Dr. Lane says this: in summary, the SPP, single plasma pack, allows 1. Collection of blood and fresh frozen plasma in a closed system of packs at RTCs, and sets aside the need to meet medicine division requirements for handling open systems for FFP collection in 5-litre pools. 2. It eliminates time-consuming pooling of FFP into 5-litre packs at regional centres. 3. The SPP is not a multi-purpose unit. Thus, its use establishes an immediate commitment of plasma to fractionation, encouraging a contractual approach to the support of central fractionation and standardisation of FFP quality. 4. The SPP allows for more rapid freezing of plasma. 5. There is positive identification of each donation until immediately before fractionation. This control requirement may become essential for regulatory purposes. 6. The SPP will incorporate the barcode system of pack and donor identification into control procedures at BPL and into pre- and post-quarantine cold storage. 7. The SPP is designed for automated opening at BPL, allowing rapid accumulation of fresh frozen plasma in collecting systems with a high degree of environmental protection of both feedstock and operator. I won't go on. Those are the key advantages that Dr. Lane sees. So in his view, it is going to be a product which meets the medicine division requirements. It's going to be more efficient in terms of the resource required at regional transfusion centres. It is going to allow for the more rapid freezing of plasma, and so a better quality of plasma. It is also going to encourage the idea of a direct relationship between the regional transfusion centre and the fractionation plant, which he considers to be important. And it will also allow for the identification of the donor for each plasma pack and a barcode system to be introduced to that end, which he identifies as something that may become a regulatory requirement. Elsewhere, there is also discussion of how the single plasma pack can be tested more accurately for hepatitis B using the RIA test, because you are testing one donation rather than a pool of 5 donations. And of course, if donation tests positive, you don't have to throw away 5 litres of plasma. You only have to get rid of the single plasma pack. Dr. Lane put forward these proposals in September 1977, and we have seen how he tied them to the Stopgap programme as well. One of the stages the demarcation between the stages was in part determined by the move from 5 litre packs to single pack plasma. Dr. Lane and BPL cooperated with Travenol on the design of a bag. That was not for exclusive use, but it was the one that went forward to trials, which began in late 1980 and expanded in 1981. In the meantime, BPL worked on capital projects that it required in order to get itself ready for single plasma packs, which included increasing cold storage and an automated process for opening the bags. As is set out in the appendix, there appear to have been some delays in late 1981 and in 1982, but single plasma packs were being returned to BPL from around the turn of that year. It does appear to have assisted in increasing the plasma supply together with the Prorata scheme, but the inquiry legal team haven't been able to quantify the effect that either of those individual approaches made. We do know, as we have seen, that plasma supply doubled, but we can't say 50% of that is due to single plasma packs and 50% is due to Prorata. And as we will see tomorrow, the impact of single plasma was subsequently eclipsed by the use of the SAG-M additive. But we will, as I say, come to that tomorrow. That takes us to the end of the Stopgap programme. There is a little more to be said about the redevelopment of BPL, again, not in detail, but just so that the chronology is presented. And then a short section on the chronology of heat treatment. Ms. Richards will go into that in further detail later in the week. And tomorrow also there will be an opportunity to look at some of the pictorial representations of the data showing both production and plasma supply to BPL in the relevant periods that we've been talking about. I note the time, sir, and I've come to a stop.
Well, thank you very much. So tomorrow morning you kick off again at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock.